Right, well, here we are. Leave it to me to oversleep. Well, I'm Matt Line, and we're 15 minutes late for stream. This is Thursday, September 13th, 2018, and we are doing Calling Sacred Cows. Today, we're going to be beginning Book 3 of the Iliad, which means that I'm going to need to change the title of this. We'll see when people start to show up, and then at that point, we'll begin reading the Iliad. Okay. We'll do that. And then I'll find... There we are. We've gotten all of the bits that need to be working. And now we will be able to at least start reading the Iliad when we get to it. There we go. Hello and welcome to whoever happened to be joining the stream. Here in another few minutes we're going to get to reading the Iliad to see if there's any more viewers that happen to show up. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, just move the bar a couple minutes ahead and we'll have begun reading the Iliad at that point. The argument of the third book of the Iliad is now the Greeks and the Trojans have gone again to battle, and, well, I guess I can just read it from here. The armies meet. Paris throws out a challenge to the Grecian princes. Menelaus accepts it. The terms of the combat are adjusted solemnly by Agamemnon on the part of Greece, and by Priam on the part of Troy. The combat ensues, in which Paris is vanquished, whom yet Venus rescues. Agamemnon demands from the Trojans a performance of the covenant. So now that we've spent one book basically talking about the wrath of Achilles, and another book talking about the Greeks going and actually deciding to go to war and how that all worked out, and then who all the participating parties are, now finally the armies meet. Homer doesn't immediately jump into the battle. Homer actually sets this up very nicely. Now this is something you can accomplish. By just having a high view from a camera and panning it over the armies, and maybe introducing some of the main characters in the middle of doing whatever it is that they're doing. I don't know if in medias res would necessarily work there, but there's something special about having an epic poem. And of course the reason the version I'm reading was published in 1771 or something like that by Cowper, and it's in iambic pentameter, so it's not exactly in the form of an epic poem in terms of the meter, but simply having a poem of such magnitude and having it written as a poem as opposed to prose means a great deal. It means that some things are worth taking the time to say right. Some things are worth going and breaking down in such a way that it comes across poetically. So here we are, Book 3. Now marshalled all beneath their several chiefs, with deafening shouts and with the clang of arms, the host of Troy advanced, such clang is heard. Along the skies went from incessant showers, escaping and from winter's cold the cranes take wing and over ocean speed away. Woe to the land of dwarves, prepared they fly for slaughter of the small Pygmaean race. For slaughter of the small Pygmaean race. Not so the Greeks, they breathing valor came, but silent all in all with faithful hearts. On succor mutual to the last resolved, as when the south wind wraps the mountain top. In mist the shepherds dread but to the thief, than night itself more welcome, and the eye is bounded in its ken to a stone's cast, such from beneath their footsteps dun and dense, uprose the dust, for swift they crossed the plain. So they're not taking to battle the way one might think that they would do in terms of defending their structure, but no, they're coming out of their place. They are meeting in glorious battle on the field. They're crossing the plain, which was definitely an honorable thing. At the time, people thought, well, we shouldn't necessarily be using certain things to our advantage. There was this idea that many battles should be fought on the field. That there should be generally fair places for fighting to take place, and this is now an instance for if you want a spoiler warning, you have the Trojan horse, which completely changes the way people think about battles and changes the way people think about war. Or rather, it makes it known that, hey, this is how people do war, but all's fair in love and war. Expect the Trojan horse, right? But still, right now you see the forces of Troy charging across the plain. And now you see Matthew Line getting his coffee. Hello, Gust. Okay, well, I'll give you a little bit of background before we continue. And you're more than welcome to read. The version that I have is by Cowper. It was published in the late 1700s, 1771 if I'm not mistaken. Book 1 of the Iliad is Achilles, the famous warrior, getting angered, very, very angered. In fact, in many books, in many translations, it's entitled the Wrath of Achilles. And he got mad because he got the shaft. He and King Agamemnon both were fighting against the Trojans, and they had as their spoil 2 women, Chryseis and Briseis. And Achilles had fallen in love with his new wife, Briseis, but Agamemnon went and took her away for himself because he was the king, and because he was forced to give his wife back by the gods. So then Achilles decides, okay, I'm not going to fight. They need me, I'm the best warrior here, but I'm not going to fight, I'm just too miffed. Then book 2 is the results of in book 1, Achilles then goes and pleads his mom to go and plead to Zeus to take revenge, to or at minimum to vindicate him. And then after Achilles' mom prays to Zeus, Zeus agrees that he will go and let the Greeks have it, that he'll go and let the Greeks go and lose without Achilles. And then book 2 is the Greeks deciding to go to war, ostensibly at the or as a result of the impetus that Zeus kind of gives them, like, go to war, go on, do it. And then there's a gigantic list of people that wind up going to war at the end, who the Greeks are and who the Trojans are. So now it basically just sets us up for the battle, where we find ourselves now having the host of Troy advanced. Such clang is heard, so they're advancing across the field. And then, of course, we wind up introducing the Greeks. When host to host opposed, full nigh they stood. Then Alexander in the Trojan van advanced was seen, all beauteous as a god. His leopard skin, his falchion, and his bow hung from his shoulder, bright with heads of brass. He shook 2 spears and challenged to the fight. The bravest Argives there defying all, him striding haughtily his host before. When Menelaus saw, such joy he felt, as hunger pinched a lion feels by chance, conducted to some carcass huge wild goat, or antlered stag, huntsmen and baying hounds, disturb not him. He gorges in their sight. So Menelaus at the view rejoiced of lovely Alexander, for he hoped his punishment at hand. At once all armed, down from his chariot to the ground he leaped. When godlike Paris him in front beheld, conspicuous his heart smote him and his fate. Avoiding far within the lines he shrank, as one who in some woodland height, descrying a serpent huge with sudden start recoils. His limbs shake under him with cautious step. He slow retires, fear blanches cold his cheeks. So beauteous Alexander at the sight of Atreus' son, disheartened sore the ranks of haughty Trojans entered deep again. Him Hector eyed, and thus rebuked severe. Cursed Paris, fair deceiver, woman mad, I would to all in heaven that thou hast died, unborn, at least unmated, happier far, than here to have incurred this public shame. Well, may the Grecians taunt and laughing loud, applaud the champion, slow indeed to fight, and pusillanimous but wondrous fair. Wast thou as timid, tell me, when with those thy loved companions in that famed exploit thou didst consort with strangers and convey from distant lands a warrior's beauteous bride, to be thy father's and his people's curse, joy to our foes, but to thyself reproach. Behold her husband darest thou not to face, the warlike prince. Now learn how brave a chief thou hast defrauded of his blooming spouse. Thy lyre, thy locks, thy person, spacious gifts of partial Venus will avail thee not, once mixed by Menelaus with the dust. But we are base ourselves, or long ago, for all thy numerous mischiefs thou hast slept, secure beneath a coverlet of stone. Then godlike Alexander thus replied, O Hector, true in temper as the axe, which in the shipwright's hand the naval plank divides resistless, doubling all his force, such is thy dauntless spirit, whose reproach perforce I own, nor causeless nor unjust. Yet let the gracious gifts uncensured pass, of golden Venus man may not reject the glorious bounty by the gods bestowed, nor follows their beneficence our choice. But if thy pleasure be that I engage with Menelaus in decision fierce, of desperate combat bid the host of Troy, and bid the Grecians sit then face to face, commit us in the vacant field between, to fight for Helen and for all her wealth, whose strongest proves and conquers he of her, and hers possessed shall bear them safe away, while ye, peace sworn in firm accord, shall dwell at Troy, and these to Argos shall return, and to Achaia praised for women fair. He seized, whom Hector heard with joy he moved, into the middle space, and with his spear advanced athwart, pushed back the Trojan van, and all stood fast. Meantime at him the Greeks discharged full volley, showering thick around from bow and sling, when with a mighty voice thus Agamemnon, leader of the host, Argives, be still, shoot not, ye sons of Greece. Hector bespeaks attention, hear the chief. He said, at once the Grecians ceased to shoot, and all sat silent. Hector then began, hear me, ye Trojans, and ye Greeks mail-armed, while I shall publish in your ears the words of Alexander, author of our strife. Trojans he bids, and Grecians on the field, their arms dispose, while he the hosts between, with warlike Menelaus shall in fight contend for Helen and for all her wealth, whose strongest proves and conquers he of her, and hers possessed shall bear them safe away, and oaths of amity shall bind the rest. He ceased, and all deep silence held amazed, when valiant Menelaus thus began, hear now me also, on whose aching heart these woes have heaviest fallen. At last, I hope, decision near, Trojans and Greeks between, for ye have suffered in my quarrel much, and much by Paris, author of the war. Die he who must, and peace be to the rest. But ye shall hither bring 2 lambs, one white, the other black. This to the earth devote, that to the sun we shall ourselves supply, a third for Jove. Then bring ye Priam forth, himself to swear the covenant, for his sons are faithless, lest the oath of Jove be scorned. Young men are ever of unstable mind, but when an elder interferes, he views future and past together, and ensures the compact to both parties uninfringed. So Menelaus spake, and in all hearts awakened joyful hope that there should end war's long calamities, alighted each, and drew his steeds into the lines the field glittered, with arms put off, and side by side, ranged orderly while the interrupted war stood front to front, small interval between. Then Hector to the city sent in haste 2 heralds for the lambs, and to invite Priam, while Agamemnon, royal chief, Talthybius to the Grecian fleet dismissed, for a 3rd lamb to Jove, nor he the voice of noble Agamemnon disobeyed. And so we made our way to line 140. And so we made our way to gaining some semblance of an understanding of how this whole thing transpires. Alexander wound up taking the wife of Menelaus, Helen of Troy now, and a whole bunch of riches. He's basically a ladies' man, and of course Menelaus couldn't let it be, and things as they turned out happened to result in a full-scale war on account of the fact that you couldn't just necessarily have the 2 of them hashing it out, because each of them happened to be in a position of power, and so my army's bigger than your army, etc. This constant fighting wound up taking place, and then everyone wound up fighting over Helen of Troy. And it's interesting how Helen of Troy makes it, for instance, into other works of literature, because this whole idea is pretty much as old as our conception, or as people being able to conceive time themselves. You know, it might not be the most pleasant thing, and certainly not the most politically correct to say, but people have been playing status games and attempting to mate for a very long time. And of course people are going to go to war if it's a status game that's being played. Now, the means by which people go to war have changed over time, but the reasons, they're all pretty much the same. I'm right, or I deserve something, or I have something, or this is what I want and I'm going to go for it, you're standing in my way. Or I've gone and wronged you, now you need to go and right the wrong and get your revenge, etc. So finally, once you get to book 3, it states, and we can understand why it is that the war was being fought in the first place. It was being fought over a woman. Go figure, right? Hello, Jack. Yeah, yet the reasons are inherently human, therefore they shall never change. I'm glad to know, Jack, that this does you good. It does me good too to be able to come here and read the chat and see what's going on. Thanks for showing up, buddy. It's awesome. It's great. Now I'm going to go and put a little central nervous stimulant into my system. A little caffeine. A little good flavor to go along with the caffeine. sometime as an aside during one of these streams, we're going to have to talk a bit about Caldi and the incident with one of the legends on how coffee was discovered, because I mean, people didn't start consuming coffee because of its taste. People started consuming it because it was a central nervous system stimulant. The least we can do is be honest about it. So, hopefully here in another 20 minutes or so, my stimulant will kick in, and I'll actually be capable of, like, talking and thinking and doing things like that. And just to let you know, if you happen to decide that you want to rewatch some bits of this when it winds up becoming a video, once the video is entirely processed and so on, the Iliad actually starts at about 6 minutes in. It's so nice to be able to just curl up with a book. It is really nice to be able to curl up with a book, even though unfortunately my paper or hard copy of the Iliad is in the States. Curling up here in a hoodie, having the Iliad up here to get free online, and it's kind of nice. It's very nice. So they're getting their lambs, making a covenant before Jove, making a covenant before Jupiter or Zeus or whoever you want to call him, of the terms of battle. We'll read then, we've gotten through line 140. We'll get through line 186, and then we'll continue with another subject that I prepared for today. Iris, ambassadress of heaven the while, to Helen came. Latest she seemed, loveliest of all the daughters of the house of Priam, wedded to Antenor's son. King Helicon, her she found within, an ample web magnificent she wove, inwrought with numerous conflicts for her sake, beneath the hands of Mars endured by Greeks, mail-armed and Trojans of equestrian fame. Swift Iris at her side her thus addressed, Haste, dearest nymph, a wondrous sight behold. Greeks brazen-mailed and Trojan steed renowned, so lately on the cruel work of Mars, intent and hot for mutual havoc sit. Silent the war hath paused, and on his shield each leans, his long spear planted at his side. Paris and Menelaus, warrior bold, with quivering lances shall contend for thee, and thou art his who conquers his forever. So saying, the goddess into Helen's soul sweetest desire infused to see again her former lord, her parents, and her home. At once, o'ermantled with her snowy veil, she started forth, and as she went, let fall a tender tear not unaccompanied. She went, but by two maidens of her train, attended, Athra, Pytheus' daughter fair, and soft-eyed Clymene, their hasty steps, conveyed them quickly to the Scaean gate. There Priam, Panthus, Clytius, Lampus sat, Thymoetes, Isaeton, branch of Mars, Antenor, and Ucalegon the wise, all elders of the people, warriors erst, but idle now through age, yet of a voice, still indefatigable as the flies, which perched among the boughs sent forth at noon. Through all the grove his slender ditty sweet, such sat those Trojan leaders on the tower, who soon as Helen on the steps they saw, in accents quick but whispered thus remarked, Trojans and Grecians wage with fair excuse long war for so much beauty, oh how like, in feature to the goddesses above, pernicious loveliness, ah, hence away, resistless as thou art and all divine, nor leave a curse to us and to our sons. When you attempt to read, your mind begins to wander. That does suck. That does suck. I am sorry. Though I must say that it is possible to get past that point. Or it is possible to get over it. Like right now, I'm having a really, really, really horrible ADHD moment. Focusing on what I'm doing right now is incredibly difficult. My mind is going every which way, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, I have an obligation to read. Because I promised. But what I found is that it's... Well, have you tried reading aloud? That's another thing that I've noticed actually helps with studying, too. Reading aloud is a lot easier to continue than reading in one's head. At least I found that to be the case. It might sound silly, and that's yet another reason that I make videos, is so that I can wind up doing these things and you know, talking to myself, in addition to making a repository of things that I'd like to be able to share with other people. But ultimately this does provide me an opportunity to open my mouth, which, being an introvert in and of itself, isn't necessarily the easiest thing, but it helps. Fulfill your obligation and be released from your curse, said, oh boy, I can't even think of who the king that returns is. Oh man. Son, the descendant of Isildur, the guy who, oh man. Descendant of Isildur. I can't even think of who it is now. Ah, yes, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Got it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh man. That actually might be another thing that we have to tackle at some point. Just going and reading The Lord of the Rings. That series is really, really good. It's been a while since I've read it. The movie wasn't bad either, but it definitely wasn't what I imagined it to be. The movie was a lot... I know lots of people say the movie was dark, but it was way brighter than my imagination had things being. And that particular scene was, in the movie, way more way more epic and way less scary than my imagination had. Ah. Uh-huh. Yeah, Tolkien does a fantastic job of immersing you in his world. Tolkien is... he's a good author. Very, very good author. He's a very, very good mind. Definitely. I don't know how gifted he was, but old man, he's just... I think of him very highly. Let me go and put this into the description here. But anyhow, I had something else to discuss today as well. And it had to do with the way that certain people wind up... well, I'll find it here, and then I'll read it for you guys. And this is another one of these pieces that isn't necessarily politically correct. And if you want to open it in another tab, you're more than welcome to follow along. And given the context of Helen of Troy, and you wound up having Tolkien doing it a different way than, say, an epic poem would. In fact, I would say, and this is my opinion on the matter, I would say that the Odyssey is a lot more vivid and dynamic than is the Iliad, but the Iliad is still really good. But then if you want to, and just both of them are epic poems, you have something that you're expecting. But in terms of the way that people can go and just, I mean, one could say that the Lord of the Rings is completely overdone, right? But I think that it's more just like it's complete. It's done. And because it was synthesized by one man, put all together by one person, as opposed to being the kind of a thing that winds up getting distilled over time and then written down by somebody, the nature of the Lord of the Rings is very different than the nature of these epic poems. And I'll dare say it will become a classic on its own terms. The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, all of that stuff by Tolkien. They will definitely become classics. And now to Alan Lobo's answer to a question on Quora. Why do older men on dating sites such as on Match.com refuse to date women their own age? And Alan says, men strongly prefer women who are younger and more beautiful. Women strongly prefer men who are successful and with socioeconomic status. That's pretty much your answer in short. The reverse occurs to a fair extent, but almost only with women. I.e., they place some premium on men's looks. But with men, they really don't care all that much about socioeconomic status in a dating partner. Not beyond a certain bar at least, like, say, having a college degree. This isn't to mean that it is futile for women to advance their socioeconomic status, but that ought to be for reasons of independence. That is vital in no small matter, but recognize that it's a very different thing from increasing one's chances of attracting a partner. two critical considerations: independence versus attractiveness, which have little in common. But this key difference in preferences between the genders bears most harshly on older women more than anyone else. No, all of that career success and money isn't going to matter very much when trying to attract a successful man. Maybe a deadbeat guy, but such women don't care for them anyway. There are two women at my workplace who are Exhibit A in that fashion. One is in her 40s, a senior director who is short and not physically attractive, highly educated, very intelligent, making a very high income of close to $500,000 a year. The other is a stunningly gorgeous admin assistant in her 20s, likely with a bachelor's degree. She makes no more than $50,000 a year. The difference in social status could not be more stark. It's by an order of magnitude. Now, guess which one of the two a single male director at the firm in, say, his 40s would prefer to date and marry? I'll bet my money that 9 times out of 10 it will be the younger and the prettier one. But if the roles were reversed between two men as such, the male senior director would absolutely wipe the floor with the lower status pretty boy. Why do men care so much about youth in women? And I'm going to jump back to the Iliad. The whole point of the war is that Helen was the most beautiful. The point wasn't that Helen was the most capable, or what have you. In fact, Helen was essentially expecting to be taken care of by either of the two people fighting for her. So Alan says, well, there's at least one solid reason that men care so much about youth, and it's fertility and ability to bear children. If a guy is 50, making $500,000 a year, he knows that he can still have children if he marries a 30-year-old admin assistant, rather than a 45-year-old company vice president. That's not a small deal. What's more, he will find several attractive women in their 30s who will be willing to date him, given the status and security that a union between them will bring. Now, there are older guys who have unrealistic expectations? Sure, but there are enough such women just the same. Plain-looking Janes who want a guy who is handsome, makes a high income, highly educated, humorous, can cook, dance, bonus points if he can kill a tiger with one hand while balancing 10 plates with the other. You have enough deluded folks in both camps, most of all in big cities where you have the illusion of access. So, why do older guys refuse to date women their own age? If these are men who are not all that successful, it's plainly unrealistic. Younger, beautiful women are not fools. They know their cash on the dating market. If these men are successful, they know that they have that option, because women, no matter what their age may be, value success and status in a man. So most older men want to date younger and beautiful women, just that the ones who have the social status know they can. The best part of it? This phenomenon will only get more pronounced in the future in the West, as women graduate at significantly higher rates than men from universities, resulting in the ranks of higher socioeconomic status men available growing thinner. You will now then have a surplus of women, competing over a smaller and smaller pool of high-status men, who in turn will have their pick of the most desirable women in the dating game. As I've said here before, the radical feminists of today, who at best are apathetic, and at worst actually celebrate how boys and men are dropping out of the school system, in all of their hubris, if not sense of retributive justice, do not yet fully appreciate the world which their daughters and granddaughters will come to live in. One where they will be forced to compete in cutthroat fashion, unless, of course, they simply compromise or give up even as they proclaim how girl power we don't need no men. I've seen that crap from both genders more times than I could care to count. It makes me roll my eyes at how pathetic it looks. It fools nobody. As I've said to my closest male friends more than once, bros before hoes? Ha! MFs, please don't make me laugh. Look, I sincerely love you men like my brothers in blood, but have no illusions. The day I find a woman whom I deeply love and decide to spend my life with, if it comes down to the wire between choosing all of you or her, it won't even be close. I'll dump your asses before you can even blink. And before I continue with Alan's thing, it reminds me of some conversations that I wound up having. And it was, long distance relationships are difficult. I'll just admit it. But they're completely possible for anybody that is dedicated. I was in a long distance relationship and a long distance marriage, and oftentimes I would get invited after grad school to go to happy hour or to go doing all sorts of different things. And my response was always, go to happy hour with a bunch of guys, or Skype, or Google video chat with a pretty woman. I wonder which one of these I'm going to pick. But they were always nice. They always gave me the option. They always gave me the invitations to go to places. But rarely did I ever take them up on it because, well, my wife took priority. It's just that simple. But anyhow, Alan says, here I will admit that a man like me is far more at comfort with his innermost raw and primal instincts, but I strongly suspect that thereabove I merely say what most men think, but will not admit openly for reasons of culture, politeness, or even decency. Well, I'll admit it. And that's why I'm bringing it up here. I think it's an excellent piece that he's written. Oh, you think women will come to not care about preferring men with equal or higher status? Huh? I mean, we can change anything by lecturing people. It's all a cultural construct after all. Yes, correct. That will happen when men come to not care about preferring younger and more beautiful women. In other words, don't yet hold your breath. With trying to unwire millions of years of evolutionary instinct, with swimming against the tide not only of time, but of most mammalian species, best of luck, and Godspeed. That describes a great deal of interpersonal interaction. Yeah. And the nice thing is, I've noticed that people are starting to become more open and honest about these sorts of things. People are starting to, again, understand, or rather admit to these basic dynamics existing. And it's very simple. The theory behind it, the evolutionary theory, the social theory, the biological theory is very simple. Bringing up children is something that, regardless of what people say, our genes do want to reproduce. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around. Now, of course, I might be misstating it in a certain way by saying that genes want something. Genes don't necessarily want anything. But the whole, or at least one of the points of life is reproducing our genetic material and setting it up to succeed. So, having children and then teaching them and bringing them up to survive. And if a woman wants to do that, her best bet is to have someone who is capable of producing what it takes to keep the children alive. And if a man wants to do that, his best bet is to have someone who's not going to die in childbirth, who has the energy and so on to be able to take care of the kids. Old folks need not apply. Infertile people need not apply in that particular sense. and at least in the big scope of things, where the point is passing on of genetic material, losers need not apply. There are all these people that just need not apply because, well, things don't go so well, and ultimately you're destroying people's survival chances. You're destroying your descendants' survival chances. And I'll admit that when I got married, I was blatantly open and honest about my priority was getting married to someone who would be a good wife and especially a good mother. So, of course, there was a baseline level of attractiveness. There was a baseline level of intelligence. There are these things that I will fully admit that if you are, like, let's say if I were a single guy, if you're below a certain level of ability in some way, I don't consider you. Just similarly to how women, if a man is below a certain level in terms of competence, he's just completely written off. You know, people like to now go and tell women, okay, you're good for being picky, and men, you're horrible. But both can, and I would say should, be picky. And eventually you wind up having the most desirable people pairing off with the most desirable people based on whatever the set of criteria happen to be in any given milieu. And then that leaves certain people off the market, and then the next people that are still in the market go and find each other until finally you wind up having people who are at the bottom of the status hierarchy finding other people who are at the bottom of the status hierarchy, and, you know, maybe pairing up with them. But this idea that it's just a cultural construct is very silly. It doesn't hold water in any discussion of real things, and ultimately sounds like an excuse given by people who are of low status for whatever reason, so that they can attempt to compete, so they can attempt to redefine the game. And the fact of the matter is, redefining the game doesn't do anybody any good. All it does is make people go and pursue after hollow things. Was it difficult to find a suitable wife for me? I think it would have been. Except for she just kind of showed up into my life. Of course, she showed up in my life at the point when I wasn't on the, I wasn't in the sexual marketplace whatsoever. I wasn't in the romantic marketplace of anything like that. I happened to meet her. She came as an exchange student. So it was nice in that I have lots of different criteria. Lots, I don't know. Like beauty, intelligence, congruent value system. And I would say that 2 and 3 are often conflated, or intentionally combined, because you need to have, like, those are all deal makers or breakers. Any one of them, and my answer will be no. Either that or I suppose you could have someone who's just a complete and total doormat that'll do everything that I say. That would be the other option, but I don't want to be with someone like that. And the reason the intelligence and the congruent value systems are important is because beauty is largely genetic. And I know you're going to wind up getting people that say, well, there's an environmental aspect. Yes, of course there is. But you can wind up dressing like a beautiful person with no makeup, no jewelry, no anything. And you can have that person wear a burlap sack, or you can have that person wear a $6,000 dress, and that person's going to and have all sorts of makeup and face paint and whatever it is that people put on themselves. That person is going to be beautiful regardless. That person is going to be beautiful regardless. So, but that's essentially that's a depreciating resource. So that basically means get involved with someone young and beautiful, and preferably, if monogamy is what matters to you, do it as a young person. Which means that you need to exemplify the characteristics of somebody that will be a success, because women pick up on that too. But anyhow, go on to the bigger, more important things that still all happen to be important criteria. You have to both be able to share a value system and act in accordance therewith. The intelligence allows you to make the appropriate decisions to follow the value system, because you can have someone who says, I value the same things you do, and then who is so mind-numbingly stupid that she doesn't know how to pursue them. Like that's a possibility. But if your goal in life is raising children, you can't have I couldn't imagine what it would be like if my children had a stupid mom. I can't imagine what it'd be like if my children had a mom with different values than I. We would be having a hammer fight all the time over basic elements of life. But for me, it would have been very difficult for me to find her if she wasn't quite almost literally plopped onto my lap. Now, of course, it took a whole bunch of pain and heartache and trouble, all sorts of difficulty to get to the point of actually being married, or of even, being interested in each other. But it was one of those things that when the situation arose that both of us were in an appropriate place in our lives to be able to pursue this. I mean, at first she dumped me. Then she came around to the realization a couple years later that it's the same realization that I had come to, because I wind up being so dispassionate about these things, that, not getting married, but for both of us, not getting married to the other person would be the single biggest regret that either of us would ever have. If we went through with not getting married, and so we got married. But just because it was easy for me doesn't mean I want to say it'll be easy for everyone, because there was a lot of luck involved. Like there was a lot of just being in the right place at the right time. And so the best thing I can suggest doing to improve one's own odds is just put yourself in places where people who have the same value system as you are likely to be. And then, this is of course advice for guys, and then be good at something. Then just be competent. You don't need to be boisterous. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be all these other different things. Just be competent. Be confident. And be with people who have the same value system as you do. That's the best way of increasing your odds. And then you have like these threshold things like beauty. Okay, is she beautiful enough? And for me, that'd be like maybe an 8 on the scale of 1 to 10, or maybe 8, 8.5. I don't know. Um, is she intelligent? Or at least like within your communication range? More or less intelligent, whatever. And that's another thing I've noticed is women, most women, I'm probably going to get a whole lot of flack by saying this, most women cannot stand being in a relationship when they are the more intelligent one. There will be a great deal of contempt. There will be a great deal of contempt. I've seen it and this is just anecdotal because my N isn't quite big enough, but at least from everything that I've seen, every single couple where the wife is more intelligent than the husband is full of all the sorts of strife that comes when the wife is contemptuous of the husband. And that's why, well, unless they happen to be so very different from one another that they just complement each other perfectly. That's another situation that can work. But that's rare. That's exceedingly rare. That's exceedingly rare. And, it just works that way. And they either wind up being unhappy, contemptuous, fighting, bickering, or divorced. But no, it wasn't particularly hard for me to find someone, but I can't take any credit for it either. I happened to be at the right place at the right time. And so did she. Of course, I always had this idea that marriage and children were important to me, and so I always had my eyes open. And I didn't make these sorts of decisions with my feelings. You decide, okay, this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. This is the person I'm going to love, honor, and cherish. And then you love, honor, and cherish no matter how you feel at any given time. So you're not looking for somebody to give you butterflies in your stomach or whatever people are looking for. You can fabricate attraction. It's like find the right person, fabricate attraction. Like decide with the right person who has the congruent set of values with you that you're going to be attracted to each other. And I know that sounds so just so far out from what people expect, but ultimately it's worked for thousands of years. I mean, arranged marriages have been a thing. And sure, you wind up getting stories of people that think that is horrible, but ultimately it's because people haven't learned how to force yourself to like someone. I'm not saying I had to force myself to like my wife. I liked her on the basis of the fact that I could easily see us as partners in life. I could easily see us going in the same direction. We have a very, very, very strong friendship, which lots of people hate the friend zone. It's like, well, I don't know if it's quite that simple. I mean, there's a difference in between being a friend and being someone who's just orbiting a woman, looking for a chance, to screw her. It's a very, very big difference there. A huge difference. Live your life in accordance with your value system. And find someone else who does the same. That, more than the intelligence thing, I think is what will be making things difficult, because regardless of how good someone happens to be, there's the element of needing to make things happen, needing to make things continue to go forward, needing to make things work between the two of you. And so, even when you claim to have a congruent set of values, you're going to wind up digging deeper and getting to know the person, and then realizing that, okay, we have to figure some certain things out. And there are some certain things we'll have to systematize this, that, and the other thing in order to make the relationship work. We're going to have to agree upon a division of labor. And all these things, they need to be discussed. Like, ultimately discussing logistics, and then how do we stick to our values? How do we not drift apart? Like, the majority of the conversations that my wife and I have about anything significant are logistical in nature or value-centric in nature. How do we go about doing this? And then once you go and figure out the values thing, then you can go and do the logistics thing with the value kept central in the thought process. Yes, most people that you encounter lack principles. It's unfortunate. Well, and I don't know if it's fair of me to put it this way, because it certainly is a lot harder than I make it out to say just by making a pithy statement. But figure out what kind of, like, if anything, write down your principles so that you have it very, very clearly defined, very, very clearly articulated. Just like a statement of purpose or a mission and value statement. Like, have a statement of purpose, have a mission and value statement, just like a company would have, or like a religious institution would have, or something. And then when people ask you about these things, you can be open and honest, and you can say, these are the things that matter to me. Can you see yourself functioning with someone like that? What matters to you in that regard? And ultimately, you can go and ascertain people's values very easily. It's just all about asking questions and prompting them to tell you more, and they'll pretty well tell you where they stand. And I've noticed that there are two different kinds of people that don't have the value system that you have. They're the kinds of people that just haven't thought about things. And those people can be turned around. God knows, my wife was a socialist when I met her. But I recognized that she had that she valued things like family. And she was intelligent, and so I was like, well, okay. Talking her out of being a socialist it's gonna work. And so just started asking all sorts of questions, and it confused her, because she's like, well, nobody ever asked these sorts of questions. Nobody wants to discuss about these sorts of things. But around the dinner table, and often until 2 in the morning, we would just have these conversations about important life matters. And, well, ultimately, because I was in the right, there were certain things that she just couldn't argue with, or she tried to argue with, and then we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and she's a very, very independent-minded, stubborn lady. And it took her a while to come to the conclusions, but then when she did come to the conclusions, It's not like she's going to change her mind, because she's gone and thought about it for herself and come to the conclusions for herself, as opposed to just being in a society that's democratic socialist in nature, and just going and following the mandates of society unthinkingly. That was the thing, is that and then she would give good arguments, meaning like better than the arguments that are often given. And so that necessitated me going and articulating my points. So if you're with someone that you share goodwill with at the beginning, you can get these points hashed out. And if there are points of contention or disagreement, it doesn't immediately preclude you from having a relationship with that person. It just means there's something that needs to be figured out. That's all. I don't know if anything that I've said has been helpful, but at least I'm trying to give you something to work with. It's just not easy. It's just not easy. Anyhow, we'll have our normal 8-minute intermission, and then we'll continue with, well, whatever subject happens to come to mind. You guys are more than welcome to bring whatever it is that you'd like to do and to talk about, and then in another 8 minutes or so, we'll do that. See you on the other side. Right, well, we're back. Now, there is quite a bit of other stuff to discuss here. And one of those things is knowledge, and of course, I'm probably going to be hitting on some of the same topics as I've discussed in the past. I don't know if I'm a one-trick pony at this point, or maybe I'm just rehashing some views that I think are very, very important to understand. I think that there are certain skills that have gone neglected, that have not been taught by school or by parents or by almost anyone in the past. Well, I don't know. Let's definitely say the industrial revolution changed a lot, and a lot of what the industrial revolution did was systematize dependence. I don't have a problem with interdependence. In fact, I think that me being able to do my thing to the best of my ability, and you being able to do your thing to the best of your ability, and then us engaging in trade to the best of both of our abilities in order to enrich each other, or for both of us to enrich ourselves on account of trading something that we don't value so much for something that we do, is integral to being able to have wealth, a good standard of living, and being able to pursue the things that we actually value. I'm not saying that money will buy you everything, but I am saying that being able to amass unto yourself the resources and the goodwill to accomplish what you set out to do is very important. But I think so many people wind up going through life and maybe not necessarily understanding the significance of what it is that they do. And I'm not going to say that, for instance, going and finding a job is a bad thing, because I don't think it is. I think that being able to find work doing something that produces value for other people is important. But I think that a lot of the time, people get into a rut. And it's kind of difficult, because you wind up having certain people going and saying, hey, look, this idea about this idea about this idea about you wind up having people with the entrepreneurial mindset saying, go and be entrepreneurs and don't do anything else. Or focus on systematizing things to the extent that you do nothing but build systems and don't work. And that it doesn't work that way. Then you wind up having people that are just like, well, it's just nothing but hard work. And both of those perspectives are short-sighted. You need to have a holistic view of things. or at least I would highly suggest having a holistic view of things. There is working hard and there is working smart. And both are important. Because there are certain things that are not glamorous, right? Plumbing is not glamorous. Garbage collection is not glamorous. Those are all things that involve doing, moving. And I'm not saying that you have to be collecting garbage your whole life, but what I'm saying is that if you decide to enter a lucrative profession such as garbage collecting, you can enter at the very bottom and not make very much. Because it doesn't really take much to go on a route and empty garbage cans. But if you do that and make connections within the industry, it's entirely possible to go and then systematize one little aspect of something, or systematize a whole process and then grow a business. You're not stagnant. You're a human being with a functioning brain. You are capable. You are very capable of going and doing a great deal. You can start as a garbage collector and own a company, end up owning a company 10 years later that makes millions of dollars if your goal is actually taking out the trash. If your goal is providing that resource for people. And who knows, you may come up with something, a more clever way of taking away people's trash that goes in and completely causes everyone in the industry to rethink what they're doing. And then, of course, you can monetize it and, you'll be set. So, the whole idea is, regardless of how you do it, and regardless of in what capacity you happen to be working for somebody else or working for yourself or what have you, go and solve other people's problems and they will reward you proportionately. And this idea that somehow solutions come from following predetermined cookie-cutter approaches isn't necessarily the case. Certainly there are some solutions that do exist, and we can go and use them. Then there's also the element of innovation. There's the element of doing things that aren't the only thing that are written down on the subject. And so that means that one of the most important things we can do is expose ourselves to new people, places, things, ideas, and integrate all of them into our own custom solutions for people's problems. And then we just go and bring these solutions to the market. Sometimes people will pay for them, other times people won't. Sometimes people need to have things explained to them, and other times it's very clear. But the important thing is that we understand the significance of what it is that we are doing. And we focus on our own self-improvement. We focus on being able to provide more and more and more value for other people. And as we wind up being able to do that, we increase our own means. And the more means we have, the more we can decide what kind of value we want to be producing. I say this because I am in the middle of making an adjustment. I am not going to stop doing education, but I'm in the process of systematizing a great deal of it. I am studying with the hopes of getting my CFA charter. I would like to become a chartered financial analyst. I would like to be able to have the certification to go and do financial analysis and to go and be able to tell people what it is that I think the markets are going to do, or just how do you run your business, just all of these different sorts of things I'd like to be able to do for other people, and I'd like to be able to actually have an impact in people's lives. And since econ and finance are so very important to me, I thought, going and taking these exams is something I can do in order to not necessarily increase the value that I bring to the world, because there's so much that I've learned just on account of living the life that I've lived, but on account of the perceived value being greater and therefore people bringing business my way, on account of the fact that I'm going to be helping them and they realize it and they know it and they'll trust it. I'm getting or attempting to go for getting my CFA charter. And so I'm studying, I'm doing exams, I'm looking at all these other sorts of things, and it's a self-study program, so it's not like you're going back to school, but for all intents and purposes, obtaining a CFA charter is equivalent to getting like a master's degree in finance or something like that. It's a general grad school level stuff. And the more I'm looking at what the material is, the more I think to myself, hey, this is stuff that has been so nicely packaged. Like the CFA Institute did a wonderful job of packaging the material. And I'm not going to say too much about it, but they did such a good job of packaging the material and explaining finances in a very systematized way. I value their materials very greatly. Not because it says anything particularly new that you can't find someplace else, aside from maybe the ethics, because you wind up having a particular set of ethics, not necessarily unique to, but definitely well articulated by and systematized by the CFA Institute. But all of the actual content is all there in one place. It's all there in one place, and you can go and just get the books and read it. And this is part of what I think people should teach themselves. These are important life skills that somehow go completely neglected by the educational system, often are completely neglected by parents, because people get the idea that you hire somebody with a CFA charter to go and do something for you instead of go and do it yourself. And I'm not saying that there's not a place in the world for people with a CFA charter. In fact, I think that they're very, very useful, but I'm thinking that an awful lot of this basic material, or an awful lot of the aspects of this could get systematized and could get developed into coursework that schools, home educators, private educators would be able to use. And that's the other reason that I'm doing this whole CFA exam thing, is I'm looking to see how different people have systematized financial education to get an idea of how to put this stuff together myself. I would like to be able to modify some currently existing programs, add a whole bunch of my own stuff, take out a whole bunch of things that might be superfluous or perhaps too deep for the scope of what one might need in everyday life. And by in everyday life, I mean like in terms of one's own setting a general direction and general financial goals and things of that nature. And my big goal here is to set myself up as a consultant, as an analyst, as somebody that can help people make important life decisions regarding their finances by going and doing a whole bunch of the heavy work that lots of people wouldn't have time to do given all of their other jobs and their responsibilities, but at the same time enable and empower people to make the right kinds of financial decisions for themselves, at least on a meta level. And as this goal becomes more clear, and as this goal becomes more fleshed out, I can go and more explicitly state what it is I'm trying to do. Like, even 2 years ago, I knew I wanted to teach people finances. I knew I wanted to teach people economics. I knew I wanted to be able to teach people all these different things that involve, like, not running the world into the ground and setting up the world around us to be better for our progeny than it has been for us. But it's taken an awful lot of false starts and an awful lot of really unusual effort to be able to actually sit down and say, okay, this is the kind of curriculum that I'm trying to go for with regard to finances. This is the kind of a curriculum I'm trying to go for with regard to mathematics. The math stuff is well on the way, and this one, the finance stuff, I'm in the very early stages of putting together. But however boring and unglamorous this may sound, this is actually some of the most important stuff you can ever learn. And I would highly recommend any of you who are interested to get the CFA books and read them. Anyhow, I hope that this is helpful for you, and I'm incredibly thankful for all of you who have and all of you who will be watching this. Talk to you later.